400 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the exact same moment. The shock wave from their arrival lit up every sensor array within 3 star systems. Automated stations sent emergency signals. Civilian transports cut their engines and drifted dark, hoping not to be noticed. And on the surface of New Carthage, a planet of 3 million people who had never wanted anything except to be left alone, every screen, every communicator, every public display suddenly showed the same image. The sky was full of ships, not human ships. The fleet belonged to the Dominion Conclave, an alliance of 12 alien species that had ruled this galaxy for 9,000 years. 9,000 years. Let that number sit with you for a moment. While humans were still figuring out agriculture, while we were building the first cities, while we were scratching symbols into clay tablets and calling it writing, the Dominion Conclave was already conquering star systems. They had cities the size of moons. They had weapons that could crack planets. They had warships that made mountains look small. And now 400 of those warships were sitting in orbit above New Carthage. The planet below them had no military fleet, no orbital defense platforms, no shields capable of stopping even a single plasma round from a Conclave destroyer. New Carthage had farming communities scattered across 3 continents, a capital city with about 800,000 people, and a governor named Elias Prynne, who had just been woken up at 2 a.m. by his communications officer screaming into the phone. Governor Prynne stood in the emergency operations center in his Capitol building, wherein he was still in his sleep clothes. His hands were shaking slightly as he looked at the tactical display showing 400 enemy contacts in high orbit. His defense minister, a woman named Commander Sarah Tallis, was already there. She had been awake when the ships arrived. She had been monitoring the border for 3 days because she had a feeling. She had not expected to be right. "How long until they're in firing range of the surface?" Prynne asked. "They're already in firing range," Tallis said quietly. "They've been in firing range since the moment they arrived." Prynne looked at the display again. "Then why haven't they fired?" Tallis pointed to a secondary screen. "Because they sent a message first." The message was playing on a loop. It came from the flagship of the fleet, a ship called the Eternal Crown, in the personal command vessel of Admiral Zethara, Supreme Commander of the Conclave's combined military force. Admiral Zethara was a Vorn. The Vorn were an ancient species, tall insectoid with dark shells that caught the light like polished obsidian. Their eyes were large and compound, like a beetle's eyes, but more intelligent, more calculating. Admiral Zethara had lived for nearly 300 years. She had fought in 67 military campaigns. She had never lost. The message was simple. "People of New Carthage, you are in violation of your tribute agreement. You have failed to deliver the required mineral shipments for the past 6 months. This is your final warning. Surrender your planetary administration to Conclave authority, resume full tribute payments, and submit to Conclave occupation. Or this fleet will demonstrate the consequences of defiance. You have 6 hours." Governor Prynne replayed the message twice. Then he looked at Commander Tallis. "Send a distress signal to Earth," he said. "Already sent," she replied, the moment they arrived. "How long for a response?" "Fast as possible, 4 hours if anyone's listening." Prynne sat down slowly. He looked at the ceiling for a long moment. "Then we wait," he said. He did not expect anyone to come. He was wrong. 2 hours after the distress signal from New Carthage reached Earth, a single ship left dry dock at the lunar defense station above the moon's far side. The dock workers who watched it leave had been working on it for 8 months. They knew every panel of its hull, every junction in its systems, every component of its engines, when they had spent more hours inside that ship than they had spent with their families. They had argued about it, worried about it, run tests on it at 3 a.m, fixed problems that had no name yet, invented solutions to challenges that had never existed before. And now they stood at the observation windows and watched it go. The ship's name was stenciled on its hull in simple letters. Not in the grand style of the old Conclave warships, with their gold trim and ceremonial artwork. Just clean white letters on black metal. Tempest. The Tempest was 3 kilometers long. That number does not seem impressive on paper. 3 kilometers. You can walk 3 kilometers in about 30 minutes. But a warship 3 kilometers long is something different entirely. The Eternal Crown, Admiral Zethara's flagship, was 2.4 kilometers. The biggest Conclave warship ever built was 2.8. The Tempest was longer than any ship that had ever fought a war in this galaxy, and length was the least interesting thing about it. The hull was made of a material that Earth scientists had spent 11 years developing. It did not behave like normal metal. When energy hit it, the impact did not concentrate at one point and punch through. Instead, it spread across the entire surface like a wave through water. A weapon that should have punched a hole through the hull would feel like it had hit something soft. The force would dissipate. The ship would move slightly sideways, but the hull would hold. The shields were stranger still. They did not project a simple energy barrier. They bent space itself. A thin bubble of warped physics surrounded the ship at all times. Plasma beams curved around it. Missiles lost their tracking inside it, because the gravitational micro-variations inside the bubble confused their guidance systems. Kinetic rounds, fired at the Tempest from point-blank range, had actually curved backward in testing and struck the ships that fired them. The Conclave scientists would have said that technology was impossible. They would have been wrong about a lot of things that day. The Tempest's weapons were classified beyond any clearance level that most Earth governments even knew existed. The crew who operated them had signed agreements that their families did not know about. There were weapons on that ship that the engineers who built them had nightmares about. But the most classified thing on the Tempest, or the thing that made even senior admirals go pale when it was mentioned in briefings, was something the crew called the silence. It was not discussed in public. It was not described in any document that existed on a network connected to the outside world. The 12 people who knew exactly what it was did not speak about it even in private. What it could do had been tested once, on an uninhabited moon in a distant star system. The recordings of that test had been watched by fewer than 30 people total. After watching the recording, High Admiral Yara Chen, the commander of Earth's entire defense force, had sat in silence for 4 minutes. Then she had said quietly, to no one in particular, "We will never use that unless we have no other choice." That was 2 years ago. Now the Tempest was moving toward New Carthage at speeds that should have been physically impossible for a ship its size, and the choice was getting closer. On the Tempest bridge, Captain Marcus Voss stood at the forward display and watched the star field ahead. He was 48 years old. His hair had been going gray since his mid-30s, and now it was almost completely silver. He was not a large man. He was average height, lean, with the kind of stillness about him that came from spending too many years in places where panic could get people killed. He had volunteered for this command. He had specifically requested it. He had written the request 3 times over 2 years, each time making a better argument, each time being told to wait. When the call finally came, he had already had his gear packed for a week. "In time to New Carthage?" he asked. His navigation officer, a young man named Specialist Donnie Orek, checked his display. 11 hours at current speed, sir. We could push to 9 if we increase engine output." "Push to 9, Voss said, "but keep it smooth. I don't want anything stressed before we get there." "Yes, sir." Voss turned to his communications officer, Lieutenant Kira Vance. She was 29 years old and had the quickest hands on any crew he had ever worked with. She could decode an alien transmission and have a response drafted before most people had finished reading the original. "What's the latest from New Carthage?" he asked. Vance pulled up the feed. "The Conclave issued their surrender demand 4 hours ago. Governor Prynne has not responded yet. He's been stalling, buying time. But their 6-hour window closes in about 90 minutes. And the Conclave fleet status? 402 ships in high orbit. No movement yet. Admiral Zethara appears to be waiting for a response." Voss nodded slowly. He looked at the display showing New Carthage, a small blue-green dot on the edge of known space. 3 million people, farmers, teachers, doctors, builders, people who had said no to the Conclave's demands and were now waiting to find out what happened to people who said no. "Open a channel to New Carthage," he said. "Secure tight beam. Governor Prynne only." "Channel open, Captain." Voss leaned forward slightly. "Governor Prynne, this is Captain Marcus Voss of the Earth Defense Accord vessel Tempest. We received your distress signal. We are en route. Do not surrender. We will be there." "Voss out." He straightened up. He did not say anything else. He did not make promises about what would happen when they arrived. He did not tell Prynne what the Tempest could do. He simply told him not to give up. On the surface of New Carthage, in a building surrounded by 400 warships worth of shadow, Governor Prynne played that message 4 times. Then he straightened his collar, walked into the communications room, and sent a message back to the Conclave fleet. "This is Governor Elias Prynne of New Carthage. We are reviewing your demands. We will require additional time." It was not much. It was barely anything. But it bought time. And the Tempest was coming. Admiral Zethara received the human governor's delay request with something close to amusement. She was in her command chair on the bridge of the Eternal Crown. It's surrounded by officers from 4 different species. The Vorn, her own people, made up most of her senior staff. But she also had Keth tactical advisors, Saran communication specialists, and 2 Marathi strategic analysts who had never lost a campaign in their lives. She had read the intelligence reports on humanity multiple times. She had watched the recordings of human military exercises. She had reviewed their ship specifications, their weapons tests, their defense budgets. She was thorough. That was why she had never lost. The humans, she had concluded, were not dangerous. They were clever. They were industrious. They had a strange tendency to keep fighting past the point where any rational species would have surrendered. But they were not dangerous, not really. Their military was small, their ships were outdated, and their most advanced experimental vessel was, according to her intelligence officers, a prototype that had not even completed its test program. One ship. That was what Earth had sent. When the report came in that a single human vessel had departed the Lunar Defense Station on an intercept course, she had actually laughed. A soft clicking sound that passed for laughter among the Vorn. They sent one ship, her tactical officer, a senior Vorn named Commander Hax, reported. "I know," Zathara said. "One ship against 402. I can count, Hax." He paused. "Shall we intercept it before it reaches the planet?" Zathara considered this. She looked at the display, showing the human ship's projected course. It would arrive in approximately 7 hours. She could send a fast attack squadron to meet it in deep space and destroy it quietly, and the people of New Carthage would never even know help had tried to come. Or she could let it arrive. Let it make its stand. Let 400 Conclave warships destroy it in full view of a planet's worth of witnesses. Let the 3 million humans on New Carthage watch with their own eyes as their would-be savior burned. That, she thought, would be the better lesson. Not just for New Carthage, for every human world that had been watching what was happening here. For Earth itself. "Let it come," she said. "We will destroy it in orbit. The surface population will see everything." Commander Hax was quiet for a moment. "And if it is more capable than our intelligence suggests?" Zathara's compound eyes moved to her tactical officer. It was a slow, deliberate movement. "Hax," she said, her voice calm. "We have 402 warships. I have personally overseen the destruction of civilizations. What could one human ship possibly do that would concern me?" Hax had no answer for that. No one on the Eternal Crown did. The Tempest dropped out of faster-than-light travel at exactly 0700 local New Carthage time. What happened next was described differently by every person who witnessed it. The crew of the Tempest said it was controlled, precise, professional. The surviving Conclave officers, in their testimony afterward, said it was like watching something ancient and unstoppable rise out of the dark. The Conclave fleet's sensors picked up the arrival signature first. The readings made no sense. The computer systems tried to process them and produced an error message. And every sensor on every ship in the fleet began screaming alerts simultaneously. On the bridge of the Eternal Crown, Admiral Zathara turned to her display. The Tempest was there. 3 kilometers of black hull, catching the light of the distant star and holding it like a threat. The ship's running lights were off. Its surface absorbed radar and scanning signals. It simply appeared in space like something that had always been there and had only now decided to be noticed. Zathara stared at the display for 6 seconds without speaking. That had never happened before. "Admiral," Hax said carefully, "our targeting systems cannot get a lock. The ship is generating some kind of interference field. Every time we scan it, the readings shift." "Manual targeting," Zathara said. Her voice was still calm, but something had changed in it. "Yes, Admiral." On the Tempest's bridge, Captain Voss watched the Conclave fleet on his display. 402 contacts arranged in high orbit, now shifting into formations. They were spreading out, moving to surround the Tempest. Classic encirclement tactics, designed to prevent escape. Voss had studied Conclave tactical doctrine for 3 years. He knew what the next move would be. "They're going to hail us," he said to Lieutenant Vance. "Already incoming, sir." "Put her through." Admiral Zethara's face appeared on the main screen. She was striking in the way that apex predators were striking. There was something about her that the human eye processed as dangerous even before the brain caught up. Her shell was deep blue-black. Her compound eyes were absolutely still. "Human vessel," she said. It's the translation software converting her language into flat, precise English. "You are one ship. We are 400. Your presence here is either the greatest act of courage I have ever witnessed, or the most spectacular act of foolishness. I am not yet certain which." She paused. "Power down your weapons and escort systems. Remove yourselves from this system. This is not your affair." Voss looked at the screen for a moment without speaking. Then he leaned forward slightly. "Admiral Zethara," he said, "I've read your record. 67 campaigns, never lost. That's genuinely impressive. And I want you to understand that I respect what that represents." He paused. "But I need you to hear me clearly. New Carthage is a human world. The people on that planet are under our protection. That you will take your fleet and leave this system in the next 72 hours, or I will remove you myself." The translation software rendered this into Vorn. There was a long silence. Then Admiral Zethara made a sound that required no translation software at all. Even in an alien language, a laugh sounds like a laugh. "One ship," she said. "One Titan-class warship," Voss replied. "There's a difference. I don't expect you to know what that means yet." He nodded to Lieutenant Vance. "Close the channel." The screen went dark. "Sound General Quarters," Voss said quietly. "Prepare all weapon systems. Point defense to full automatic. Shields at maximum output." The lights on the bridge shifted from white to red. A calm voice moved through the ship's speakers, room by room, deck by deck. The crew of the Tempest moved to their stations without running, without shouting, without the chaos that gripped the crews of less experienced ships. They had trained for this. They had drilled for this. They had spent 2 years preparing for exactly this moment. What do you think was going through their minds in that moment? Write in the comments, because I've thought about it a lot. 400 enemy ships, 3 million people watching from the surface below, and a crew who had volunteered for a mission they knew might kill them. "Weapons officer," Voss said, turning to Lieutenant Commander Bryce Hallen, a stocky man with steady hands and the kind of expression that gave nothing away. "What are we looking at?" 402 contacts, Holland said without looking up from his display, grouped in 4 main formations. They're completing an encirclement. If we were a normal ship, we'd have nowhere to run. "Good thing we're not a normal ship," Voss said. "Warm up primary weapons. I want firing solutions on their flagship and the 6 heaviest cruisers in the northern formation." "Solutions plotted, sir." On the surface of New Carthage, 3 million people watched their screens. Some were in emergency shelters. Some had gone to high ground to see the sky. Some were holding their children. Governor Prynne was in the operations center watching the tactical display with Commander Tallis beside him. "Is it enough?" Prynne asked quietly. Tallis watched the single blue dot that represented the Tempest, surrounded on all sides by red contacts. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But they came. That means something." The Conclave fleet fired. But space doesn't conduct sound. There is no roar, no explosion you can hear. But what the sensors of the Tempest recorded in those first few seconds was something the crew would spend years trying to explain to people who were not there. 400 warships opened fire simultaneously. Plasma cannons, mass drivers, concussion missiles, particle beams, every weapon the Conclave combined fleet carried, all directed at a single target. The energy output was enough to sterilize a small continent. The missile swarm was thick enough that a pilot flying through it would have been unable to see the stars. The Tempest shields went active. The visual effect was not subtle. A shell of distorted space appeared around the ship, visible as a faint shimmer in the light from the distant star. Inside that shell, the normal rules changed, and plasma beams bent. They curved around the Tempest like water around a stone in a river and continued into empty space beyond. Missiles entered the bubble and lost their tracking. Their guidance computers tried to compensate for the gravitational anomalies and began spiraling, corkscrewing, missing their target by meters that felt like miles. Mass driver rounds, traveling at a significant fraction of the speed of light, struck the edge of the bubble and deflected. The Tempest did not move. When the first barrage ended, the ship was exactly where it had been. Its hull showed stress indicators in 3 sections. 2 shield emitters had experienced power fluctuations. The galley on deck 12 had lost power, and the food printer had to restart. That was it. 400 warships. Everything they had. And the Tempest had a problem with its food printer. On the Eternal Crown, Admiral Zethara stared at her display in silence. "Damage assessment on the enemy vessel?" she asked. Her tactical officer's voice was very careful. "Admiral, we are not detecting any significant damage. Recalibrate the sensors." "We have recalibrated, Admiral, 3 times. Silence. "All weapons to cycle rate," Zethara said. "Maintain continuous fire. Alter frequencies and projectile masses. Find something that penetrates." "Yes, Admiral." On the Tempest, Lieutenant Commander Hallen looked at his captain. Voss nodded once. "Fire," Holland said. The Tempest's primary forward batteries came online. The weapons did not look dramatic from the outside. They did not produce the brilliant plasma columns of the Conclave's cannons or the bright streaks of missile exhaust. They fired in a frequency range that Conclave sensors were not designed to detect. The energy was invisible to every instrument in the enemy fleet. The closest Conclave ship, a destroyer called the Steel Fang, did not explode. It did not break apart or burn. The steel and composite and ancient alien metals of its hull simply stopped existing. The 500 beings aboard it simply stopped existing. One moment the Steel Fang was there. The next moment there was empty space where it had been. No debris, no energy signature, no evidence that anything had ever occupied that point in space. Every ship in the Conclave fleet registered the event. Every tactical officer tried to process what they had seen, yet none of them had words for it. The second shot hit a carrier from the Keth species. Same result? Gone? Just gone? The third shot took 3 ships at once. A Conclave assault carrier and its 2 escort cruisers, traveling in close formation. They disappeared in sequence so fast it looked simultaneous on the recordings. Panic moved through the Conclave fleet, like electricity through water. The Tempest was not staying still. She was moving now, and that was when the real shock registered. A 3-kilometer warship should move like a mountain. It should turn slowly, accelerate slowly, require vast distances to change course. The Eternal Crown, the flagship, needed 12 minutes to complete a full turn at combat speed. Even the fastest Conclave destroyers required 45 seconds to execute a combat maneuver. And the Tempest turned in 8 seconds. She moved between formations like something that weighed nothing, like a predator slipping between gaps in a crowd. Her engines burned with a blue-white light that the surviving crew members would later describe as the most beautiful and most terrifying thing they had ever seen. She was firing continuously, every weapon system working in coordinated sequence, and with each second, more Conclave ships ceased to exist. From the surface of New Carthage, it looked like stars were going out. Commander Tallis watched the tactical display in silence for a long time. Then she turned to Governor Prynne. "I believe," she said quietly, "that we should send Earth a thank you message." Admiral Zethara had 300 years of military experience. She had seen wars, and she had seen weapons that should have been impossible. She had watched civilizations fall and new ones rise in the ruins. She believed, on some fundamental level that ran deeper than thought, that she had seen everything. She had not. "All ships," she broadcast on the fleet-wide channel, her voice for the first time in 300 years, carrying something she had not expected to feel. "All ships, concentrate every weapon on the enemy vessel. Everything. Every cannon, every missile tube, every secondary system. Fire." The fleet responded. 340 ships, because 62 were already gone, turned everything they had on the Tempest. Space became something other than space in that zone. It was light. It was force. It was energy beyond measurement. The New Carthage's orbital observation stations recorded the event as the equivalent of a small star appearing briefly above the planet. The Tempest flew into it. Her shields screamed. Power readings spiked across every system. 3 armor panels tore free from the hull and tumbled into space. An auxiliary generator on Deck 9 went offline with a sound that the crew in adjacent compartments described as the ship being hit by something enormous. Warning indicators cascaded across every display on the bridge, and 4 crew members died. Their compartment was breached in the instant between the shield fluctuation and the backup system's activation. 4 people who had volunteered for this mission. 4 people who had known the risk and come anyway. Captain Voss received the casualty report without expression. He had prepared himself for this. He had thought about it for 2 years. It did not help. Nothing fully prepares you for the names. But the Tempest was still flying. She emerged from the barrage with damage readings across 30% of her systems, with fire in 2 sections, with a shield generator running at 63%. She came out of the fire with smoke trailing from her wounds, and she was still pointing at the Eternal Crown. Voss looked at the damage reports. He looked at the 4 names that had appeared in red on his casualty display. He was quiet for exactly 5 seconds. Then he turned to his weapons officer. "Hallen, bring up the silence." Every person on the bridge knew what that meant. None of them said anything. Lieutenant Vance, who had been working her communications console without pause since the battle started, stopped typing. The Specialist Orek, at navigation, went very still. "The silence is warming up," Hallen said. His voice was professional and steady. His hands were also very still. Voss stood from his command chair. He moved to the center of the bridge and stood there. He was not a tall man. He was not an imposing figure. But in that moment, on that bridge, No one on the Tempest was looking anywhere except at him. "Shipwide," he said to Vance. "Open, Captain." He looked forward at the display showing the enemy fleet. "This is Captain Voss. We took hits. We have damage. We have people we lost today who came here because they believed that what we're doing matters. That defending this planet matters. That standing up when everyone expects you to run, that matters." He paused. "What comes next is going to end this. But I want every person on this ship to understand something before it happens. We did not build the silence because we wanted to use it. We built it because the galaxy needed to know we could. The difference matters. Remember it." He looked at Hallen. "Fire when ready." The silence was not a beam. It was not a missile. There is no good language for what it was, because it was something that should not exist. In the scientific reports, it was described as a stabilized quantum anomaly capable of inducing localized existence failure. In the words of the engineer who spent 7 years building it, it was the place where things stopped being. At the bow of the Tempest, the light began to change. Not brighter, not darker, something else. A color that the human visual system could not quite assign a name to. It's something between black and the absence of light. Something that made the eyes try to look away even as the mind insisted on watching. On the Eternal Crown, Admiral Zethara saw it happen. Her tactical officer made a sound she had never heard from him before. "Admiral, the energy readings from the enemy vessel are... The numbers are not... Admiral, I need you to look at this." She was already looking. The readings were not possible. The math her computers were producing was not possible. No ship could generate that kind of energy. No weapon could do what those numbers suggested this weapon was about to do. "All ships," she broadcast. "Emergency scatter. Maximum speed. All ships, get away from that weapon. Now, go." They tried. The silence fired. It appeared as a sphere of absolute darkness in the center of the Conclave fleet's main formation. Not the darkness of space. Space has stars. This had nothing. It was the complete and total absence of anything. And it expanded. The Eternal Crown was caught in the outer edge of the sphere. Admiral Zethara had 2 seconds. She saw it coming. She saw the nothing rushing toward her ship at speeds that made escape impossible. She had time for one thought. Not a tactical calculation, not a command, not a strategy. Just one simple thought. I did not know. She was gone. The Eternal Crown was gone. 3,000 crew members across a dozen alien species were gone. No debris, no energy signature, no memorial, just empty space. The sphere continued expanding for 11 more seconds. When it collapsed, 91 Conclave warships had ceased to exist. The silence after the silence was very different from the silence before it. What do you think the surviving Conclave crews were feeling in that moment? Write in the comments. Because I think about it. 300 warships. Officers who had trained their whole lives. Beings with families, with histories, with everything you have. Watching 91 ships simply stop existing. And knowing they were next. Captain Voss looked at the display. 111 Conclave ships remaining. All of them moving away at maximum speed. All of them running in every direction at once. Like something that had been held together by fear and had just been shown something worse to fear. "Open a channel to the surviving fleet," he said. "All frequencies." "Channel open." He's Captain. Voss looked at the display for a moment, at the empty spaces where ships had been. at the small blue dot of New Carthage below, at the tactical indicators showing his own ship's damage, the system's offline, the 4 red names on his casualty display. This is Captain Marcus Voss of the EDA vessel Tempest, to all surviving Conclave ships. He kept his voice level. There was no triumph in it. He had not planned for triumph. Your fleet is destroyed. Your admiral is gone. You have seen what our weapons are capable of. You cannot fight us. You cannot outrun us. You have exactly one choice remaining. He paused. Power down all weapons and cease movement. Any ship that maintains powered weapons will be treated as a threat. Any ship that attempts to flee will be pursued. You have 5 minutes to comply. This is not a negotiation. This is not a threat. This is simply what happens next. He nodded to Vance. She closed the channel. The bridge was quiet. Outside, the stars were very still. Then, slowly, one by one, the energy signatures of the remaining Conclave ships began to change. Weapons powering down, engines going to standby, shields collapsing, 111 warships surrendering to a single vessel. Confirmed, Lieutenant Vance said, her voice not entirely steady. All remaining contacts showing compliance. No active weapon signatures detected. Voss sat back in his command chair. He looked at the display for a long time. At the empty spaces, at the compliant ships, at the planet below, where 3 million people were slowly starting to understand what had just happened. He did not celebrate, and he did not stand up and address the crew with a speech about victory. He felt something that was not victory, something heavier and quieter than that. Send a message to Earth, he said quietly. Tell them the Battle of New Carthage is over. Tell them New Carthage is safe, he paused, and tell them to prepare, because what comes next is going to require more than one ship. The news hit every inhabited world in the galaxy within 36 hours. 1 human ship, 400 enemy vessels. The math kept being run by every species analysts, and the math kept coming out the same way. Impossible. Except it had happened. The sensor recordings were real. The survivors' testimonies matched. The empty space where 91 Conclave warships had been was very, very empty. The Dominion Conclave, which had ruled the galaxy for 9,000 years, with a combination of military force, ancient authority, and the simple fact that no one had ever successfully challenged them, began to fracture within 72 hours of the Battle of New Carthage. 3 species withdrew from the Conclave alliance within the first week. They sent separate messages to Earth, each one carefully worded, each one essentially saying the same thing. We were never the worst of them. We want peace. Please do not use that weapon on us. 2 other species reached out in secret channels. They wanted not just peace, but protection. They had seen what the Tempest could do. They wanted to be near it when the next war came. The remaining 7 Conclave species screamed at each other in emergency sessions for 3 weeks. They ran analyses. And they reviewed the recordings. They tasked their best scientists and engineers with finding a counter to human technology. Their scientists ran the numbers and produced reports that no one wanted to read. Humanity had spent 20 years of tribute payments funding research that the elder races had never considered necessary. The Conclave had spent 9,000 years perfecting technologies they already had, because no one had ever made them need new ones. The gap was not closable in a year. It was not closable in a decade. By the time the Conclave could theoretically match what the Tempest carried, Earth would have built 10 more like her. Captain Marcus Voss returned to Earth 6 weeks after the battle. He was given a hero's welcome, the largest public celebration Earth had organized in 30 years. Morn parades through 3 capital cities, a formal address to the United Earth Council, children in Tempest costumes, his face on every broadcast, his name in every headline. He sat through all of it with the same expression he had worn on the bridge when the casualty report came in. He visited the memorial wall in Meridian Park, in Earth's old capital, on his 4th day home. The wall listed every human who had died under Conclave rule. 20 years of names. Colony world bombings. Citizens who had protested and disappeared. Children taken as labor for off-world facilities. The names went on for nearly a kilometer. He stood there for 2 hours. Admiral Yara Chen found him eventually. She was his commanding officer, one of the few people who had known about the silence before the battle. She was a small woman with careful eyes and the kind of presence that made rooms go quiet when she entered them. "They want to negotiate," she said, coming to stand beside him. "The Conclave?" "What's left of it, and others. Species that were never part of the Conclave but watched what happened. Some of them have been waiting for this for centuries." She paused. "It's happening, Marcus. The thing we built for, not just the weapons. The other thing." He looked at the wall, at the names. "How many worlds?" 43 have already reached out. More every day." She was quiet for a moment. "They're not coming to us because they're afraid of the Tempest. Some of them are, yes, but more of them. They're coming because of something else." He turned to look at her. "They've been watching us," Chen said. "Not just the battle, for years. Watching the way we run our worlds, the way we argue with each other and still manage to agree on things, the way we take in refugees and share technology and build things that benefit everyone instead of just the ones on top." She paused. "They want to be part of that. Not afraid of us. Part of what we are." Voss looked back at the wall. "We did a terrible thing to get here," he said. "We did a necessary thing," Chen said quietly. "The terrible part is knowing those aren't always different." He was quiet for a long time. "What comes next?" he asked. "We build something new," Chen said. "Not an empire, not a conclave. Something else. Something that decides things by vote instead of firepower. Something where every species gets a seat." She looked at him. "We're calling it the Galactic Commonwealth. It will take years, maybe decades. It will be messy and difficult, and there will be crises we can't predict." "And the Tempest?" "She'll be there, if she's needed." Chen paused. "But the hope, the real hope, is that she won't be needed again." Over the next 10 years, everything the Admiral had described began to happen. Earth's Titan-class program expanded. 12 ships were built and commissioned, each one named after a natural force that could not be reasoned with, could not be stopped, could only be respected. The Tempest was the first. After her came the avalanche, the tsunami, the inferno, the typhoon, the blizzard, the monsoon, the wildfire, the tremor, the cyclone, the maelstrom, and finally the cataclysm, which took its name seriously, and whose crew had perhaps the most unsettling sense of humor in the Defense Accord. Together, those 12 ships were enough to end any conflict the galaxy could assemble against humanity. Everyone knew it. No one tested it. But the real change was not military. Human worlds became something that the galaxy had never quite seen before. They became places where beings who had been persecuted by the Conclave could find safety, where ideas could be shared across species without the Conclave deciding which ideas were acceptable, where a being from any world could arrive with nothing and be given the chance to build something. The Commonwealth grew slowly, and then all at once. Worlds left the Conclave, what remained of it, and joined the new arrangement. Not because human warships were parked in their orbit, not because they had been conquered, but because they had seen what human society offered and they wanted it. Within 50 years, the Dominion Conclave did not exist. It had not been destroyed. It had not been conquered. It had simply become obsolete. The species that had once made up its membership were Commonwealth members now, sitting in councils alongside beings they had once enslaved or ignored, voting on matters that affected everyone. It was not a perfect system. It was not a clean system. There were crises and disputes and moments when it seemed like everything would come apart. But it held. Each time it faced a challenge, it held. Captain Marcus Voss did not command the Tempest again after New Carthage. He spent 3 years in quiet retirement on Earth before Admiral Chen convinced him to take a new role. Not a military one. He became one of Earth's first diplomatic representatives to the newly forming Commonwealth, traveling to worlds that had never seen a human being in person, sitting in rooms with beings who viewed humanity with everything from deep respect to profound suspicion, and doing the work that was slower and less dramatic and more important than anything he had done in combat. He traveled for 22 years. He died at age 81 on a ship between worlds, which felt to people who knew him like exactly the right place. His final years had been spent on a low-gravity world, with clear skies where he could see the stars from his front window every night. At his memorial service, attended by humans and beings from 47 other species, Admiral Chen read a short statement he had written and left with her. It said, "I spent my career learning how to stop things. I spent the second half of my life learning how to start them. I am not sure which was harder. I know which mattered more." His gravestone carried only his name, his rank, and one line he had asked for himself. He saw the storm coming. He chose to walk toward it. In every Commonwealth world, from the rebuilt colony on New Carthage to the ancient and now transformed homeworlds of former Conclave species, there was a memorial to the Battle of New Carthage. Not a monument to military triumph, not a statue of a warship, just a simple marker with an inscription that every child in the Commonwealth eventually learned. It read, "They were told that power meant domination. They used their power to prove otherwise. This is the hardest thing, do it anyway." And across the galaxy, in schools and libraries and late-night conversations between beings who had once been enemies, the story was told. In the story of one ship that came when no one believed anyone would come. The story of a captain who destroyed a fleet and then spent the rest of his life building peace. The story of a species that was told to be afraid and learned instead to be something else. The story of how humanity looked at 9,000 years of someone else's rules, looked at what those rules had cost, and decided, quietly, carefully, at enormous expense and with enormous loss, to write new ones. Not better rules, because they were human rules. Better rules because they had to be better. Because the alternative was becoming the thing they had fought. And that, in the end, was the thing that changed the galaxy. Not the Tempest, not the silence, not 400 destroyed warships, or the empty space where the Eternal Crown once sailed. the choice, or the choice to win a war and not become the war, the choice to build something instead of only destroying, the choice that every species in the Commonwealth, one by one, recognized as the most difficult and most important thing a civilization can do. Choose to be better than what hurt you. The Tempest served for 40 more years after New Carthage. She was never fired on again in anger. She was decommissioned with full honors at the Lunar Defense Station where she had been built, and her hull was preserved as a museum. Millions of beings from across the Commonwealth visited her in the first decade alone. They walked her corridors. They stood on her bridge. They looked at the command chair where Voss had sat and made decisions that changed everything. They did not come to celebrate war. They came to remember what it cost and to remember why it was worth it.